Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. I'm the author of this book, and this is another episode of Nomad Capitalist, where we do a deep dive into the human side of the nomad capitalist lifestyle, talk about the issues that go beyond legal tax reduction, second passports, international investing, and talk about how to live, how to exist, how to think as a successful nomad capitalist. Today I've got a lovely, very minty tea, just really smell the mint. Moroccan mint tea is really a favorite just to get yourself fired up. And I wanted to use that as an introduction to talking about a very interesting question we've gotten from several people for Nomad Capitalist, which is how do you prepare a child to be a nomad capitalist? How do you raise them up through a nomad capitalist lifestyle? How do you prepare them to have the qualities that we talk about here? Now, I don't have children. It's something that I've talked about and something that as I get older, I think more about and I philosophize about. I have worked with folks with children, so I've seen some of the challenges that come in with this. I've certainly, as someone who is very invested in the nomad capitalist lifestyle, given thought to how do you address the common issues that a lot of people say cannot be solved. And as a lifelong entrepreneur, my philosophy is everything can be solved. If you want something badly enough, you'll make it a top priority and you'll get it done. And so what I want to cover is two aspects of if I'm raising a child, some things you can think about. And also if I'm preparing a child, perhaps you want to live in the country that you're from, or for some reason you are unable or unwilling to move, but you'd like for your current child to be able to go out into the world and adopt some of the tenets of this lifestyle. Obviously, there are some basic strategies, having a diversified financial portfolio, and that could be opening bank accounts for children. If you live overseas, opening a bank account for your child in that overseas country so they have access to that, saving money for things like university, encouraging your child, if they're going to go to university, to go to one overseas, especially for folks in the United States. There are a lot of more affordable opportunities in parts of Europe, for example, where it's a lot more affordable to go to really good universities. Getting your child a second passport or getting the whole family a second residence, having access to somewhere else. A lot of people have come to us in the last year in particular looking to get European Union citizenship for themselves and their entire families. I've even had single people or newly married couples coming and saying, I want to get European Union citizenship so that our future children will have it. Maybe we don't want it forever, but we'd like our children to have the option of being Canadian European, American European, and having that option to be able to work in that whole big European bloc. All the way down to simply buying your child a property overseas that they can go and use. And again, if they have a second passport somewhere else, or you're getting them a second passport somewhere else, maybe you get them a property in that other country. So those are kind of the strategic things that we normally talk about that can apply to an entire family. But when it comes to raising a child in a nomad capitalist environment, the first thing is you really need to have a plan. And what I've seen is you'll have a couple, assuming that you are together, whether you're legally married or just raising your child together as co-parents without legal marriage. What I've seen is you often have men and women who think that they're on the same page, but they're not on the same page. And so that's the first thing that you need to figure out. Now, sidebar, we have had some gay couples come and hire us. I think having a child in an international context would be a little bit more difficult. It certainly could be doable. You have to make sure you're choosing the right places. Do understand, though, if you're not legally married, whether you're heterosexual, homosexual, whatever, some of these countries that you're going to go to, they work within the confines of marriage. A lot of the emerging countries that we talk about, they know marriage. They don't know dating. They don't know living together. They don't know, gay. They just know man, woman, married. And so if you're not in that type of relationship, you may have to be investing more money to get two residences. It may be a bit more difficult in some countries if you have a child in that situation. So those are factors that you want to work out as a sidebar. But you want to have a plan. And I've seen a lot of cases where, guys come in, my wife is fully on board, the wife isn't fully on board. And you really have to define, what it is that you're willing to do. The first thing is there an expiration date to your nomad capitalist lifestyle and involving the child in that? Some people will come and they'll say, hey, we want to go overseas and have an adventure for 5 or 7 years, save some money on tax, and then come back to raise our child in our country. Obviously, that's not raising your child in a nomad capitalist environment. But perhaps you want your child to spend the first 5 years following you around, but then when it comes time to go to school, you want to settle down in one place. Now, there's nothing wrong with being settled in one place as a nomad capitalist. If you do so intentionally, generally you would do so to where your tax burden is lower than where you left. And you can do that, obviously. Plenty of people live in Dubai or Andorra or Monaco or wherever else. But you can settle in one place. And if you're doing that again with intentionality, you're going to expose your child to things that maybe they wouldn't have been exposed to where you're from. But understand, what are your values? Understand, is there an expiration to this date to this? How long is this going to go on for? And how is it going to adapt as you go? What I would also make sure I understand is, what are my limits and can I push through those limits? So again, if you think that, a child can't go to school living this lifestyle, let's say you want to follow my trifecta, you want to have 3 different homes and spend about 4 months of the year there. Obviously, you're not going to be enrolling your child in a traditional school when the time comes, if that's the case. And so if that traditional school is important to you, then you need to figure out, all right, can I break through that barrier? Am I willing to, for example, hire a tutor and have that tutor follow us around? That's one thing that I think is well worth considering, is you can go to a lot of countries where people are very smart, you can find lots of smart people, and hire someone for perhaps the cost of sending kids to an international school in some of these more expensive places. And that person can be the tutor. They can follow you around, no different than some of the nanny services or maid services where they live with you potentially, or they're traveling with you. Obviously, there's some logistics there. And perhaps if you have a child, you don't want to be traveling to 27 different countries over the course of the year, at least not altogether. But that's a boundary that I feel like you could push through, okay? So understand, am I on the same page with my spouse, my partner, my co-parent? How is that going to be handled? There is a legal implication there that differs in different places, and you want to make sure that if you're traveling, one parent has the child at some times, what are the legal paperwork requirements of that to satisfy the airlines, the immigration officials, etc. We're not going to get too much into that here. The next thing that I think is really important to understand is, what is the identity? In my situation, it's very difficult because, am I an American? I don't really think so anymore. And certainly a child who is not who would not be a U.S. citizen in my case. I'm a former U.S. citizen. My spouse is never was a U.S. citizen. So therefore my child won't be. They're not going to grow up in the U.S. There's certainly some influence. You could call it Ohioan influence. You can call it American. You could call it the Anglo world. You could call it whatever you want. But that's not really the identity. Is the identity from the mother's side, but then we're not really living in those places either. I think you want to define an identity that children can hold on to. And so, is that based on the languages that we speak? Is that based on where we're living and we're going to develop some kind of ties to some of these places? What is that identity? For me, personally, I have political views that we don't talk about all that much because I'm somewhat of a pragmatist. But certainly I would say, for me, holding back on some of those political views, at least with a young child, would be important. So I don't really want to build an identity around some kind of political libertarianism or something like that. But you have to define what that identity is for you and make sure that child has an identity. Obviously, the so-called third culture kids go through life and sometimes there's a longing because their parents are living in a certain way and they're not giving them an identity. I think defining that kind of identity is very important for anyone. It could be a global citizen. I think certainly a lot of kids enjoy traveling around and seeing different places and being in different cultures and getting to interact with different people in different situations, but that's important. The other thing I think is important to keep in mind is, as the kids get older, or if you already have kids and they're getting older, is work. I was talking to someone about this a couple days ago because he's got daughters that are entering their teenage years in the next year or two. And, I grew up when I was, 15 years old. I got my first summer job at Mally's Ice Cream Parlor in Bay Village, Ohio. And if you think I'm intense now, you should have seen me at age 15, because all the other kids made fun of me because I was always moving so quickly and I wanted to get everyone their ice cream treats. We made these beautiful sundaes with so many different recipes, and we had it delivered to people's tables, and I was always trying to move very quickly because the customers want their food quickly, and the other kids didn't really understand that. So it was kind of an eye-opening experience. And I went on to work at other restaurants and stuff like that as a kid, and so my family always prioritized work. Even before that, I would sell magazines and stuff for school door to door. I would invent. I made my own magazine at one point and sold that door to door. Obviously, if you're living in other countries, if you're a citizen of those countries, then that's one thing. If you are just obtaining residence permits in a country like Malaysia, for example, or in parts of Latin America, you're just moving around, even on tourist visas at times. You want to make sure that you're adhering to whatever your legal rights to work are. Now, in most of the countries that we talk about here, the government is not running around like the Gestapo shutting down lemonade stands, as you will see in places like the United States. And there's probably a decent amount of forgiveness that's available for a child going and selling stuff. One thing I've talked about, only half jokingly, for a couple years, is when I go to some places, namely in Latin America, you'll see kids in the street, like literally in the street between the lanes of traffic, selling gum and stuff like that. And I've always thought that even though there's perhaps more of an unfortunate necessity in those cases than would be in the case of my child, I would kind of like my children to do something like that, because certainly what you want to, from my perspective, keep in mind is if you're going to be living this international lifestyle, you're going to be seeing people who are not as successful or as privileged as you are. And so I think from the perspective of raising a child, you want to have a certain amount of humility. You want to have a certain amount of awareness about what's going on in the world. And so I think work is a great way to do that. How you want to define that based on where you're living is interesting. I remember the first time I met people from China, and I was asking, this is back many, many years ago, in my early days of travel. I said, did you work when you were a child? And they said, no. There's not enough jobs. Certainly, at least back then, there weren't enough jobs. I mean, adults do those jobs. Adults work at KFC. Adults work at the ice cream parlor. We don't need 15-year-olds to do it. Plus, our parents want us studying. So, you have to figure out that kind of work and study balance and how those things affect it. Personally, I think that part of the conversation about school is what happens after they become 18. Are they going to university? Where are they going to go? I've often said that if you have a child now and they're not sure about university, rather than spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases on sending a child to university, you might just want to send them on a gap year or two to some of the countries that we talk about that are emerging, where you can start some of the most simple businesses with not a lot of money. And to me, so few people flinch at the idea of spending $250,000, including going into debt $250,000 to fund going to university. But to say, hey, here's 10 grand, go to Cambodia and figure something out, seems crazy. And so, if you have a child who wants to become a doctor or a lawyer or something like that, then perhaps university is appropriate. But for me, the question of not necessarily deciding for the child, but if you have a child, what's going to happen? What are you willing to prioritize for an older child in the future in terms of what's their schooling after they leave the nest? Another thing that I think is really important is languages, and with that goes cultures. So learning different languages. In my home, we speak a couple different languages that we would teach a child, all of which I think are relatively relevant. Certainly, if you speak one language as a parenting couple, introducing other languages, whether it's through the tutor, whether it's through just meeting people around or doing self-study with all the apps and programs that are available now. I think learning languages is a great way, and something that I wish I would have been more focused on at a younger age. Languages are also a gateway to culture, and so if you're spending time in different cultures as a child, you're probably going to have more of a connection there, not only for yourself, but for working with other folks as you get older. So there are a lot of countries still that are rather isolated, and if you're not one of them, they won't push you away, they won't reject you, but you may not have as many social opportunities, dating opportunities in the future. You may not have some of the career opportunities. And so kind of defining in the context of my residences, my citizenships, the places where I spend time, the places where I think my child would be the best, able to thrive in the future. Do they speak the language? Do they understand the culture? There are certain things that if you grow up around it, you feel it, right? There are certain cultures, as much as I go there and I love it and I love the people and I love the opportunities, I can't entirely become one with the culture and how they operate. Any culture where people are 45 minutes late, I can never really understand that. And if you have a child, I think exposing them to different experiences like that, not because you want them to be 45 minutes late, but because you want them to be exposed to the way different people around the world work. I think it creates more empathy, which is a good thing. But that empathy also translates into more opportunities where they now have different places as an adult they can go and work. And so when I see people who are able to seamlessly move between Europe and Asia and Egypt and Abu Dhabi and that kind of thing, that's really a benefit for a child to have not only the ability to speak those languages, English, Arabic, Spanish, for example, but also to kind of instinctively be one with some of those cultures to where they're accepted and they can get things done and they know what they're doing. I think it also just contributes to a happier life. I also think if you have older children, how does the dating process work and understanding different cultures? Where is your child going to be meeting people? Where is their social sphere of influence? Certainly, I know that for me growing up, and even as a young adult, some of the things that I wanted to do, being probably acting older than my age, and not in every way, certainly, but in some ways, in the way that I dressed and the way that I spoke and the things that interested me. Where I come from was not really a great fit for that. And so I think understanding, what, again, I don't know that you want to tell your child, or I wouldn't at least, here's what you should do. I would never tell my child, they have to be in business or take over the business kind of thing. But understanding, where they're going in their growth in life. What are their interests, and maybe what's a place that feels comfortable for that? Where are the best social opportunities? Where are the best educational opportunities? Also, where are the best, dating opportunities? For me, I think a lot of people in the West feel disenfranchised there socially, and I think if you look to other places where children can go, I think that's a lot better. As I said, I know friends of mine who have mostly boys, but also girls who are, 15, 16, 18, 19 years old, who it's always awkward, I think, no matter where you are. But certainly, if you have some of these, language skills, if you fit in with different cultures, I can tell you there's countries where I go where a lot of the teen angst that I think those of us from the West have seen, they seem to feel like it's more minimized there. Not to say that it's eliminated, but there seems to be more social cohesion in some of these places. And so I think exposing your children to environments where you can minimize that, you can minimize perhaps some of the bullying or perhaps some of the angst is a good thing to introduce to a child's life, and perhaps that leads to healthier relationships that are not made because, hey, here's what's available, here's all that I know, but I'm aware of different places and I'm going to go where I'm treated best in a social sense. And I think people would be a lot happier in their lifelong relationships if they had the opportunity to choose where they were treated best rather than simply, choosing people that are around them. So those are some suggestions for what you can think about, at least, if you are going to be a family, if you're going to raise children on the road. If you have children, I'd like to hear your comments on this. What do you think should be added? What do you think is missing? And would look forward to hearing from you on those points. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, Learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.